The charge nurse told me on my first day, "Don't go in room 3, not if you hear something, not if the call light goes on, not even if someone swears there's a patient in there." There isn't. There hasn't been for a long time. I graduated from nursing school in May of 2019 and took a night shift position on the 4th floor of a hospital in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. I was 24. I was exactly the kind of person who had no business working night shifts alone, optimistic, a little overconfident, certain that the world was made of things that had explanations. The hospital was old, built sometime in the early 1960s, from what I could tell. The 4th floor had that particular old building smell you can never fully scrub away no matter how much disinfectant you use floor cleaner on the surface, and underneath that, something older, something closer to stone and time. The unit had 8 rooms. At full capacity, we carried 6 or 7 patients at a time. The night shift ran from 11 to 7, and I genuinely loved it from the start. The hospital breathed differently at night, quieter, more honest. During the day, hospitals are about moving people through admissions, rounds, discharges, paperwork. At night, it's just you and the patients and whatever the dark decides to bring in. My supervisor was a woman named Delores. She had worked the 4th floor for 32 years and had the kind of face that had made peace with everything it had ever seen. On my first orientation night, she walked me through the entire unit. We passed all 8 rooms. When we came to room 3, she didn't slow down. She didn't gesture toward it. She looked straight ahead and said quietly, like she was telling me not to touch a hot stove, "We don't go in there." I laughed. I thought she was joking. She kept walking. The first time the call light in room 3 activated, I was 3 weeks into the job. It was a Tuesday in October 22nd. I remember exactly because I had written the date on the back of my clipboard that morning, and I kept glancing at it the rest of the night like it meant something. 2:40 in the morning. The unit was quiet. 4 patients in other rooms, all stable, all sleeping. I looked up at the call panel and saw room 3 blinking amber. I sat there for a moment. Then I picked up the phone at the nurse's station and called the room. It rang and rang and rang. I went to Delores at the medication cart. I told her the call light was on. She didn't look up from the cart. She said, "Reset it." I said there was no patient in room 3. She said she knew that. I asked how a call light activates in an empty room. She said the wiring on the 4th floor was old and that it happened sometimes and that I should reset it and not think about it. I reset it. 6 minutes later, it blinked back on. I reset it again. That time it stayed off. I told myself it was the wiring. The building was old. Things happened. There was nothing else to think about. The second thing happened in January during rounds. I was checking on a patient in room 2 when I smelled it not from inside room 2, from the hallway. Something sweet and decayed, like flowers sitting too long in water that's gone dark. The kind of smell that registers wrong before you've consciously identified it. It was coming from room 3. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. The smell was distinct and directionless at the same time, concentrated at that door, but also somehow diffused, like it was seeping through the walls themselves. The fluorescent light above room 3 was humming just slightly out of sync with the others. You only notice those things at night when everything else is still. Then I heard the breathing. Low, slow, rhythmic. From the other side of the door. I called Delores from the wall phone in the hallway, keeping my voice even. By the time she reached me, maybe 90 seconds later, the smell was gone. She pressed her ear to the door for a long time. We both listened. Nothing, just the building settling. She stepped back and looked at me and said, Go back to your station. Not it was nothing. Not you imagined it. Just go back. The third thing happened in March, and it was the one that stayed with me the most because it had a paper trail. I was sorting through old filing records. The hospital still kept physical backups in a cabinet near the nurses' station when I found a chart that had slipped down and wedged itself behind the cabinet. It was very old. The paper had yellowed to that particular shade that takes decades to develop. The header read Room 3. The patient's name had been blacked out, not redacted neatly with a stamp, but crossed out manually with a thick pen, pressed so hard the ink had bled through the page. The admittance date was still visible, September 14, 1987. In the clinical notes, in a careful nurse's handwriting, a single line, "Patient insists she is not alone in the room." Below it, in different handwriting, smaller, less certain and dated 2 days later, "Agreed not to document further." I brought the chart to Delores. She took it from my hands and read it without any change in expression. She folded it and put it in her pocket. Then she said, almost to herself, "Some things on this floor have been here longer than either of us." I waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. I went into room 3 alone on a Wednesday night in April. It was 3 in the morning. Delores had been called 2 floors down to handle an intake situation, and I was alone on the unit for maybe 20 minutes. The call light in room 3 had triggered 4 times since the start of shift, blinking on, ringing through to silence, going dark when I reset it. The 4th time it came on, I stood up. I walked to room 3. My hand closed around the door handle, and the cold came through instantly, not just in my palm, but up through my wrist and my arm and into my chest. Not the cold of a room with the air conditioning too high. The cold of a room that is taking warmth from you. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was made tightly, formally, the way beds were made before hospitals stopped caring what they looked like. No equipment, no Roman IV stand, no monitoring cables. The window reflected the room back at me, the pale glow of the parking structure outside giving everything just enough light to see by. The call light was still blinking. In the window's reflection, I saw the chair in the corner, and in the chair I saw a shape. I turned around. The chair was empty. I didn't move for a very long time. The blink of the call light was the only thing that changed. I was standing in a room that was empty and still and wrong in a way I couldn't name, and then I looked at the chair, at the cushion, at the deep, fresh impression pressed into the fabric, the kind a seat holds when someone has only just stood up. I left. I did not run. I walked back to the station, sat down, and did not look at the light panel and did not look down the hallway. When Delores came back, she looked at me and said, "You went in." She didn't wait for me to confirm it. I transferred to the 2nd floor in May. Pediatrics. Bright, noisy, alive. Children who ask endless questions and never stop moving and make the hours go fast. I've looked into the history of the 4th floor since then, not deeply, because I was afraid of what I'd find if I dug too far. But I did find one orderly who had worked there in the early 90s, a man named Calvin, who told me over coffee one afternoon that there used to be a long-term patient on that floor. Someone who had been there for a very long time. He didn't know the full story. He'd only heard pieces secondhand. What he remembered was her complaint, the one she had repeated to every nurse who came in from her first week to her last. She felt like she was never alone in the room. Calvin paused when he said that. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. She had been in room 3. I asked when she had checked out. Calvin didn't answer right away. He looked at the table. Then he looked at me with an expression that was quiet and careful and said everything without saying a word. I haven't been back to the 4th floor since that conversation. But sometimes at night, when the hospital goes quiet and the lights hum and I'm the only one moving through the halls, I think about that chair, about the impression in the cushion, about what was sitting there when I turned toward the window, and whether it's still sitting there now in that empty room on that tightly made bed, waiting for the next person who decides that rules are for someone else. The call light still comes on. Nobody resets it anymore. If you've experienced something you can't explain, tell me in the comments. Subscribe. I have plenty more to tell.